I paid $3.5 million for silence. No parting hugs. No final I'm sorry. Just a wire transfer confirmation blinking on my lawyer's iPad and the smell of his cologne as he leaned back like a man clocking out of someone else's war. Finalized, he said, tapping the screen. You're free. Free. That's what they all called it, as if freedom came with a receipt and a signature in front of a notary. I didn't shake his hand. Just grabbed my coat and walked out of the courthouse into a January wind that made my ears sting. I didn't feel free. I felt like I just paid a ransom to escape from a house I once built with love and ended up trapped in like an unpaid intern watching someone else enjoy the corner office. Melanie didn't show up for the final signing. She sent a junior associate, wore white in the wedding photos the following weekend. I boarded a plane to Lisbon on a Thursday. No grand farewell, just one suitcase, a faded Navy passport, and a printed itinerary I read exactly once before crumpling it into the seatback pocket. I'd picked Lisbon for 3 reasons: cheap rent, strong coffee, and the Atlantic, wide enough to drown any memory in if you stared long enough. My apartment was small, 3rd floor, peeling paint, a leaky faucet I didn't fix because the drip became comforting. I bought a mocha pot and brewed espresso so strong it stripped the enamel off my bitterness. I read books I'd ignored for years, watched birds instead of the news, counted how long I could go without checking social media. 4 days. The first time. Then Melanie popped up on my old feed. New profile picture. Her on a yacht with 2 of the board members from her firm. Caption: freedom and promotion. Front and center stood the man she used to call just a mentor. CEO, big smile, his hand suspiciously placed on the same waist she once made me swear was off limits to everyone but me. I turned off the phone. That was the first real moment of peace I'd had in months. By the way, if you've gotten this far and you're listening without subscribing, do me a small favor and hit that button. It helps the team keep bringing you more of these stories that make you question what people say when they use words like love, trust, or mentorship. Anyway, back to Melanie, the woman who once cried when I missed her mother's birthday because I was closing a client deal. The same woman who called me paranoid for noticing how often her mentor started calling after 9 p.m. Apparently, their big quarterly presentation required urgent wine-fueled brainstorming in his Tesla. I didn't press, I didn't accuse, I just watched. And when I brought it up, once calmly, she scoffed. He's married, David. Grow up. Ah yes, the holy seal of matrimony, the ultimate proof of integrity. Like married men have never lied, cheated, or rewritten entire chapters of their lives to fit a more profitable narrative. Still, I stayed. Like a fool in a burning building holding out for the sprinklers. It wasn't just the cheating. Honestly, that would have been easier to digest. What got me, what gutted me, was how quickly she shifted into a new life like I'd never existed. 1 week she was crying about losing the houseplants in the divorce. The next, she was in a villa on the coast with $10 million in angel investments and a string quartet playing Vivaldi behind her engagement toast. They called it a merger, personal and professional, said it was a bold new vision for modern business partnerships. I knew better, because years ago, buried under layers of spreadsheets and non-disclosure agreements, there was a lie, a very expensive, very quiet lie, the kind of lie you don't build a marriage or a company on. And I was the only one who knew exactly how it was buried. 6 years ago, Melanie bought a new blazer, navy blue, price tag still on when it arrived. She said it was for board visibility. I said nothing. Every woman deserves to look sharp. But then came the lipstick I'd never seen before. The perfume that clung to the hallway like a stranger's memory, the new client dinners that started with last-minute texts and ended with her phone on silent all night. Quarter-end prep, she'd mumble, unzipping her boots at 11:30 p.m. She always sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced the lie in traffic and settled on the least offensive version. Sometimes she'd toss her bag on the counter and kiss me on the cheek, lips cold, body stiff. One night, I said it. You sure this guy isn't crossing lines? She was halfway through a glass of Sancerre, swirling it like a judge. She smirked. He's married, David. Grow up. I wish I'd said more. I wish I'd pointed out that being married didn't prevent people from being predators or partners in crime. But I didn't. I laughed like a trained seal and said, guess I'll go fold laundry like a real man then. And I did. folded her work shirts, ironed slacks I would never see her wear again. The irony was, she had me so busy doubting my own instincts that I started thanking her for staying ambitious. That's how the gaslight gets you. Soft, warm, and convincing. Back then, her boss was just a name on a card I wasn't allowed to touch. He doesn't like spouses in the office, she once told me when I offered to drop off her forgotten laptop charger. We're private-facing. Optics matter. Right, optics. Now I'm in Lisbon. It's been 2 months since the divorce, and the air tastes like fresh ground espresso and salt water. I've traded spreadsheets for sketch pads, trying to remember how to draw again, but habit dies hard. My phone buzzes. News alert. I open it, and there they are. Melanie and just a mentor holding hands at some over-decorated engagement event that looks more like a hedge fund's year-end gala. Her hair's blonder, his suit is tighter. There's a quote under the headline, CEO and VP set to merge more than just assets. I actually laughed. There it was. The punchline to the joke I'd been living in for over a decade. Her eyes are dead in the photo. His grin is polished, like he practiced it in the mirror for investor slides. I close the article. But the rage doesn't follow. Not anymore. It's not that I've forgiven her. It's that she's become exactly what she always admired. Sleek, performative, and painfully obvious. I remember once, after a conference, she came home with a thank you wine bottle signed by 3 board members. She said she held the team together when the Bradstone deal nearly went sideways, but I was the one who flagged the valuation discrepancy before it got buried under 87 pages of legal gloss. She said, well, no one needs to know everything, right? I thought she meant discretion. Now I know she meant concealment. I saved the firm $10 million lawsuits and got a thank you mug. She got a VP promotion and a matching Tesla. And now she is the CEO. But here's the thing about climbing a ladder, you greased yourself. One misstep, and everyone you stepped over remembers. Especially the guy who used to sleep next to you. The guy who quietly saved every document, every odd invoice, every email she once begged me to forget. There's a difference between paranoia and memory. One makes you question reality, the other writes it down in case someone tries to rewrite it later. And Melanie? She's rewriting like hell. Only problem is, I kept the original draft. She wore a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than my entire 2003 sedan, and that car got us through a recession and a miscarriage. Now, Melanie's gliding down an aisle carved into a cliffside garden, barefoot like some kind of corporate goddess, while a string quartet murders Debussy for a crowd of men in pastel blazers and their surgically enhanced second wives $10 million. That's what the article said the reception cost. Flown-in orchids, a French chef imported for a single weekend, custom everything, right down to the monogrammed canapes. And of course, there was a drone light show with the company logo hovering above the newlyweds like a branded halo. I saw it all from my rented flat in Lisbon. A Portuguese sunset behind me, a lukewarm beer beside me, and my phone screen glowing with her wedding hashtag, Legacy and Love. LinkedIn lit up like it was Christmas morning. Congratulations to the power couple of the year, a true merger of excellence, when leadership meets love. I wanted to throw my phone off the balcony. Instead, I bookmarked the article, not out of masochism, out of interest, because the press release made one critical error. It reminded me that Melanie and her husband, the CEO, had finally linked their personal lives to the one transaction they always swore could never see the light of day, the Bradstone acquisition. That name had been buried 6 years ago, beneath NDAs, boardroom theatrics, and one very ugly weekend where Melanie cried in the shower for 2 hours while I deleted a draft whistleblower email from my desktop. Back then, she wasn't VP yet, just a sharp operator who discovered a valuation misalignment with Bradstone's European IP. In plain terms, they overpaid by millions for patents that didn't legally exist. And when I flagged it quietly at first, Melanie came home with a bottle of scotch and a plan. "We're not going to destroy our future over this," she whispered, eyes red. I didn't want to. God help me, I wanted to believe it was fixable. So I helped her draft the response letter. I recalibrated the timestamps. I removed names from metadata. She cried again when it was done, this time into my shirt, and said, "You're the only reason I feel safe." And then, like a magician, she disappeared that entire event from institutional memory. The partners who objected were ousted, the junior analysts silenced with retention bonuses. One mid-level compliance guy got restructured out of existence and now sells boats in Florida. Bradstone officially was a win, but there was one tiny thread that never got snipped. Me, I wasn't just her husband, I was the guy who reviewed the documents. And while I never leaked them, I made one backup, not because I planned to use it, because Melanie had said something that stuck with me, offhand over Chinese takeout the night we finalized the cover-up. "If this ever comes out," she muttered, "we're finished." He said the Bradstone transaction was never to be discussed again. He, her mentor, now husband, the man grinning like a Bond villain next to her on the cover of TechSphere Weekly. So I pulled up my old email archives. Gmail still had everything. The draft Melanie wrote with me, the one with the phrase "material discrepancies remain unaddressed but mitigated through discretionary valuation," the one they never sent but used as a template to craft a cleaner, shinier lie. I saved it again, and this time I read it with different eyes, not as the man trying to preserve a marriage, but as a ghost watching the people who buried him pretend they'd built something sacred on top of his grave. They were dancing, toasting, posing for drones, and tomorrow they'd be launching a new division, Athena Risk Intelligence, built on principles of transparency and trust. Perfect, because you can't build trust on rotting floorboards. And I still had the blueprints. There's a kind of quiet that only comes after betrayal, not the dramatic, slap-in-the-face kind you see in movies. No, this one is surgical, the kind that carves you out from the inside and leaves the shell standing. I had lived with that quiet for years, but in Lisbon, it turned into something else, readiness. I woke up early that morning. The sun wasn't even over the rooftops yet. The street vendors hadn't started shouting. The cafe downstairs hadn't opened. Stillness wrapped the building like a hush before a verdict. I opened my laptop, entered the password, then the second one, then plugged in the external drive. A black square on the screen blinked once. Encrypted folder. Bradstone Elpo Final. I hadn't opened it in 5 years. Inside, nothing had changed. There it all was. The doctored reports, the internal memos that vanished from company servers, the PDF with the asset summary showing a 10 million valuation based on software patents that, if you trace the trail far enough, were legally void in half the markets they claimed to dominate. And then, the kicker, forged timestamps. The original signatures of 2 junior analysts removed. The compliance note that mysteriously never made it into the final board packet. And every change meticulously logged by me, because I didn't just roll over when Melanie asked me to stay quiet. I documented everything. I was a compliance officer, for God's sake. That instinct doesn't vanish just because your wife cries and tells you she's not ready to lose everything we built. She framed it like a partnership, like a necessary evil. She said, "We'll fix it after the merger. Once it's stable, I just need you to trust me, David." What she meant was, I need you to take the fall if this ever blows up. She didn't ask me to sign an NDA, not as a contractor or consultant. She drafted a handwritten agreement and made me sign it at our kitchen table, next to the pasta she left uneaten that night. It began with, "This letter affirms that any and all communications and documents relating to the Bradstone matter are confidential and remain between husband and wife." Between husband and wife. That sentence alone could bury her, because it confirmed 2 things. First, that she admitted the material existed, and second, that she manipulated spousal privilege to suppress corporate liability. And now she'd married the man who orchestrated the cover-up. That made things poetic. I sat back in the creaking Lisbon chair and stared at the drive icon blinking on my desktop. I hadn't touched it in years. I'd moved on, I thought. Let her have her life. Let her have the clean storyline. Scrappy VP marries visionary CEO, builds legacy. But she brought the past back to life when she made it a foundation for her new empire. Bradstone wasn't just buried. It was used as fertilizer. And the flowers looked pretty until you checked the soil. I selected the folder, compressed it, encrypted it again under a new name, Athena Root Zip. Then I emailed it to myself. 3 different addresses, one backup in a cloud server in Iceland, one on a private USB that now sits in a lockbox under my kitchen tiles. And then I waited, not with fear, not with anger, with focus, because I knew something Melanie never understood. When you lie to save your future, you'd better be damn sure your past isn't sitting on a terrace in Portugal with a mocha pot and the receipts. I didn't need revenge, I needed clarity. And now, I had it. The reception was a performance, a meticulously choreographed hallucination of perfection, glittering under Edison bulbs strung across a cliffside lawn. Everyone played their parts. Investors in tailored linen suits, PR executives balancing champagne flutes and faux sincerity, and Melanie at center stage, rehearsed smile welded onto her face like she'd never once lied, begged, or panicked. She laughed at every joke, touched every arm, looked every person in the eye with that polished upward tilt of the chin that always meant she was about to sell you something. Her husband, the CEO, gave a speech about vision, resilience, and the rare beauty of finding someone who shares both your heart and your hustle. Cue soft claps, one minor standing ovation. They kissed like they were closing a merger, not celebrating a marriage. And the string quartet resumed Vivaldi like their instruments were on retainer. But not everyone at the wedding had a script. Table 6 didn't make it into the drone footage or the official guest list on the company press release. Table 6 was where they seated the people you didn't want close but couldn't afford to not invite. And among them was Anthony Greaves, former mid-level compliance associate, fired 5 years ago without cause, just weeks after the Bradstone deal. Officially, downsized. Unofficially, silenced. I hadn't seen his name in a long time, but someone snapped a photo that night and tagged it, his face older, heavier, his eyes sharper, like a man who'd spent the past half-decade chewing on a grudge and washing it down with cheap scotch. Anthony wasn't a saint. He cut corners, made enemies, but he was smart, and when he flagged irregularities in the Bradstone filings, he sent an internal memo to 3 people, the CFO, Melanie, and the CEO. The memo disappeared, so did Anthony, but ghosts like him don't stay buried forever, especially not when they've had 2 bourbons and are staring down the 2 people who gutted his career, now glowing under fairy lights and clinking glasses like royalty. The moment was awful and beautiful all at once. During the 5th toast, some ridiculous anecdote from a venture partner about how Melanie once closed a funding round over duck confit and a dead phone battery. Anthony stood up. No one invited him. No one saw him walking to the mic, but he was suddenly there, stumbling slightly, tie loosened, mouth twitching like a man who'd rehearsed this in the mirror more times than he cared to admit. He took the microphone from the startled COO and blinked into the lights. Before the cake, he slurred, just wanted to say, I hope this marriage lasts longer than their last illegal audit. The silence was surgical, like the entire reception inhaled and forgot how to exhale. A few idiots chuckled, thought it was a joke. Then they saw the CFO's face. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't blinking. Melanie's expression cracked. Not shattered, just cracked. The corners of her mouth sagged. Her hand trembled slightly around the flute. Her new husband, her boss, her co-conspirator, her second act, gripped the armrest of his chair like it might float him out of there. Anthony smiled, and then he handed the mic back and sat down like he hadn't just opened the gates of hell. No one mentioned it after. No one had to, because the sentence hung in the air like a time bomb. The board members whispered. The investors texted under the table. The general counsel started sweating through his collar. And somewhere halfway across the world, I was sitting in a cafe eating a pastéis de nata, scrolling through tagged photos, when I saw a grainy clip of Anthony at the mic. No sound, just his smirk. Melanie's face behind him, drained of all its curated glow, and I knew that sentence, that moment, it was the start of a detonation that had been waiting years for the right ignition, and now it had arrived. The clock hadn't even struck midnight when the calls began. It started with a tap on the CFO's shoulder from a junior investor rep who, 2 glasses of sparkling rosé deep, still had the foresight to ask, "Is there documentation we can review on Bradstone, just for transparency?" The CFO muttered something about old files and excused himself from the cigar bar like a man heading for a root canal. By 11:14 p.m., the general counsel was on a bench outside the reception tent, tie undone, blinking at his phone screen. The email from an internal risk analyst simply read,
Do we have a clean copy of the Bradstone compliance report? Asking proactively, social media is going to pop. Attached was a grainy clip from the reception. Anthony, mic in hand. Caption, ex-employee spills corporate tea at wedding toast. Already gaining traction on a subreddit known for ripping apart tech scandals. A corporate watchdog account reposted it within minutes. Comments piled in fast. Wait, isn't that the VP who got the sudden jump? Bradstone again? That company's cursed. Someone's gonna jail. Then came the calls they really didn't want. A high net worth investor out of Singapore, one of their early angel backers, demanded a copy of the entire Bradstone transaction chain. Full risk review, line by line. We need assurance this won't go regulatory. But here's the problem. No one had a clean file, because the only clean file existed 6 years ago, before Melanie and her now husband sanitized it like a murder scene in a hotel suite. And only one man outside that room had ever seen it, signed off on it, under duress, with his name buried in metadata most people never notice. Me. By 11:47 p.m., my name had surfaced in a Slack channel titled #Bradstone Firewall. The senior legal analyst dropped this gem. Anyone have a current contact for David Hanley, former compliance, married to Melanie at the time? If he has the original draft, we need to get ahead of this. Like now. Back in Lisbon, I was brushing my teeth. Phone buzzed once, then again, a few spam calls, then a number I vaguely recognized from a Boston area code. Probably legal, maybe PR. I let it ring, then a blocked number, then another. I unplugged the phone, walked out to my small chipped balcony and looked at the river. Calm, silver under the moonlight. For the first time in years, I didn't feel reactive. I didn't feel like I was drowning in someone else's chaos. I felt in control. Because let me tell you something about secrets. When you bury them, you better pray the person holding the shovel isn't still alive, sober, and 5,000 miles away with an encrypted drive and nothing to lose. The next call came 5 minutes later. I let it ring too. They wanted to panic. They wanted to scramble. They wanted to shove toothpaste back into a tube that exploded in front of half their cap table and God knows how many journalists. But now, they couldn't. Because they forgot one thing. When they twisted my arm to stay quiet, they made it personal. But now it was business. The house of cards was teetering. And I was holding the only beam that could keep it upright. The real power in any disaster isn't held by the one who caused it. It's held by the one who chooses when or if to fix it. And I hadn't made that decision yet. By morning, the number of missed calls had hit double digits. Most were unknown. A few I recognized from the board meeting calendars I used to sync with back when Melanie still let me be helpful. The voicemails came in rapid succession, sharp corporate staccato, all delivered in that same breathless tone companies use right before they spin a press release as an exciting opportunity for restructuring. Then came the blocked number. I knew who it was before I picked up, not because I wanted to, just curiosity, like checking the stove after you already know the house is on fire. Her voice was tight, measured, too calm. David, she said, drawing out the word like she still owned it. We need to clarify a few things. You might be contacted by a journalist. Please don't respond. We're handling it. The situation is exaggerated. It's being weaponized by people with agendas. Just don't overreact, okay? You always used to get emotional about, I hung up mid-sentence. The thing about Melanie is, she's brilliant in rooms filled with men who overestimate their own IQs. She knows how to twist condescension into pity, how to look just vulnerable enough that no one suspects the dagger under her blouse. I used to find it impressive. Now I found it exhausting. I placed the phone face down on the table, opened my laptop, navigated to a folder I hadn't clicked in years, affidavit draft final.pdf, a document I wrote the night after we buried the Bradstone mess, 4 pages, calm, precise. Written like I wasn't furious and ashamed and waking up 3 times a night, wondering if I just made myself complicit in corporate fraud to save a woman who'd already packed her emotional bags. It detailed everything. The original timestamp logs, the missing disclosures, the redline emails Melanie had deleted, and most critically, the conversation I had with her mentor, the man now wearing a wedding ring she used to swear she didn't want. He told me verbatim, "There's no upside in truth here, David. People trust the result,
not the process. I wrote that down word for word, and now their entire empire was begging me not to remember. I sipped my coffee, glanced again at the document. The irony was rich. They'd spent years pretending I was irrelevant, slow-moving, too sentimental. That was Melanie's favorite word during the divorce, sentimental. She said it like a curse. Now, that sentimentality had turned into leverage because what they didn't understand, what they never bothered to check, was that I'd never stopped documenting, even the quiet parts, especially those like when Melanie left me off a compliance call and said it was to protect the marriage, or when she had me draft her NDA as a husband because involving legal made it too messy. I recorded that conversation, backed it up twice. She signed the note in cursive, drunk on Malbec and moral gymnastics. And I still had the audio file. The power dynamic had flipped, but they hadn't caught on yet. They still thought this was a favor I might grant out of nostalgia or residual affection or, God forbid, guilt. But they forgot the golden rule of leverage. The person who moves last holds the most weight. I hadn't moved yet. I was still sipping espresso in Lisbon, watching their empire flail through headlines and Reddit threads and blind item Twitter leaks. And I had nowhere to be, no clock to punch, no one to protect anymore, just time. And the pleasure of deciding whether mercy was deserved or just another asset they thought they could buy. There was no catharsis, no shaking hands, no grand music cue, just a cursor blinking in the subject line of an email. To sec.gov, audit.inquiry at Calmbridge Funds, mwhite athenacortec.com. Subject: regarding Bradstone compliance discrepancies. Statement and documentation enclosed. Attachments: affidavit draft final.pdf, timestamp logs EL6, audio/conversation to M4A, no body text, nothing to explain, nothing to soften, because truth doesn't need pleasantries. I clicked send. The progress bar blinked once, then disappeared. That was it. 6 years of rot and redirection, gone in a single keystroke. I sat back slowly, closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet, except for the squeaky fan I kept meaning to fix. Outside, a tram rumbled past on Rua de Bica, its bell a lazy warning to pedestrians too sun-drunk to care. My phone buzzed exactly 42 seconds later. Caller ID, Melanie White. She hadn't used that name in years, not even during the divorce. She was always Melanie Caldwell, like she still owned the brand we built together. But the moment the documents hit her inbox, she defaulted to the name that came printed on every fraudulent memo I'd just submitted. She called again, then again. I watched the screen light up. The same number that once sent me grocery lists, late-night I love yous, and long-winded rants about board politics, now just pulsing with panic. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, out of policy. She broke the contract, the unspoken one, the one that said, I will hold your secrets if you don't turn them into gold bricks you throw at other people's heads. She didn't just move on from me. She used me, edited me out of her new storyline like I was bad PR, erased my fingerprints from the foundations I built while she stood on stage accepting applause for vision and leadership. And now she was a VP turned bride turned emergency contact for a federal compliance investigation. I opened the fridge, took out a bottle of mineral water, sat back down on the couch. My phone buzzed again. Block number. Voicemail. I didn't listen, because I already knew what it would say. David, this isn't the way to handle this. You don't understand the context. We can make this right. Together. That last one always kills me. Together. As if together meant anything after she traded honesty for equity and turned love into a series of negotiations disguised as late-night PowerPoints. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Lisbon air has a weightless feel in the late afternoon. Everything slows, even the guilt, especially the guilt. I'd done what I never thought I'd do. I weaponized the truth, not for revenge, not even for justice, just to end the lie. I'd watched them dance on my grave long enough, sip champagne paid for with silence, build empires on my restraint. But every empire has a fault line, and I just exposed theirs, not with threats, not with fire, with facts, the kind no PR firm can spin. And Melanie, she can keep calling, keep crying, keep scrambling. But the email's already out, and Pandora's inbox is open. The first headline dropped before sunrise. AthenaCore faces SEC scrutiny over Bradstone acquisition irregularities. No clickbait, no spin, just the cold machinery of exposure.
delivered by a mid-tier financial outlet that doesn't do splashy headlines, just reliable dissection. But it was enough. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire across investor feeds, corporate Slack threads, and every group chat that had ever whispered, "Something's off with that deal." By mid-morning, Athena Core's internal legal team had entered full triage mode. Melanie's inbox was locked, her executive calendar wiped.
Official language, administrative leave during internal review. Unofficial, she was radioactive. Her new husband, the CEO, the king of the branded power couple, wasn't spared. The board issued a vague press statement citing governance restructuring and executive accountability. The phrase "removed pending review" became the most replayed line in that morning's investor briefing. 4 hours later, Calmbridge Ventures, one of their earliest and largest backers, pulled $4 million from their latest funding round. No press release, no warning, just a blank space where capital used to sit. Others followed in silence, not because they were noble, but because no one wants to be on the Titanic after the first breach. The company's valuation cratered overnight. 10 million? Try 4. And dropping. Their PR team released a bland apology full of meaningless nouns: integrity, trust, complex situation. But no one cared. The wolves had already circled. Whispers of class action suits echoed in HR corridors. Someone started compiling a timeline for external counsel. Another forwarded it to a reporter, probably anonymously. I didn't follow every development, but I didn't need to because I could feel it, that ripple of panic, of unraveling control. The corporate empire Melanie clung to with white-knuckle intensity was crumbling under its own weight and my quiet nudge. At 6:38 p.m., my phone buzzed. Text. From her. No punctuation, no greeting, just, "You've destroyed everything. Are you happy?" I stared at it for a while, not because I didn't know how to respond, because I wanted to savor how far we'd come from "David, I just need you to trust me." I typed, "No, just finished." Hit send. No follow-up came. No long-winded voice memo, no apology, no justification, no bargaining. Because she knew this wasn't impulsive, this wasn't vindictive, this was precision, the slow, deliberate response of a man who had been silent for too long. A man who'd been told he was too sentimental to matter. A man who watched his wife weaponize ambition and leave collateral damage in her wake. People say revenge is a fire, something that consumes. They're wrong. Revenge, real revenge, is cold. It's a scalpel, not a hammer. It's knowing exactly where to cut so the whole structure collapses without ever raising your voice. And as Melanie watched her kingdom burn from the inside, I didn't need to gloat. I just needed her to realize I hadn't ruined her. She had. I'd only stopped cleaning up the mess. The call came at 7:12 in the morning. I almost didn't answer, not because I was busy. No one in Lisbon is really busy at 7 a.m., but because I knew what would be on the other end of the line. I could feel it through the screen, the desperation, the ruined grace, the voice of someone who built their entire persona on being untouchable and now needed the very man she dismissed to put out the fire, but something in me wanted to hear it. So I picked up. There was no greeting, just breath, and then tears. "David," silence. I didn't think it would go this far. More silence. Her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since the night we lost the baby. The night she blamed herself, then turned the grief into a project plan. She always did that, reshape pain into progress. But now the pain had no utility. They're freezing my assets, my board seat's gone. He's blaming me for the whole thing. And the press, they're digging through everything. I could hear her pacing, sobbing, muffling the phone like she was embarrassed by the sound of her own collapse. I didn't think you'd actually... She trailed off. Then came the pitch. "I just need one statement from you, something neutral, even a few lines. You don't have to lie, just something to clarify the timeline, something to soften this." I said nothing. "David, please, we're drowning. I'm drowning." Still nothing. Then, "You used to love me. Doesn't any part of you still care what happens to me?" That was the moment I finally spoke. "You used to say I wasn't ambitious, that I lacked vision, that I didn't know how to move forward in life." She whimpered. I continued, "But I saw this coming before you even kissed him. I saw what it was built on, and I knew one day it would collapse under its own lie. Please, her voice cracked again, that final aching syllable stretching into the quiet like it might be enough to change something. It wasn't. I ended the call, not with a click, just with a quiet final press of the red circle. Then I stood, poured myself a fresh coffee. The mocha pot hissed like it approved. I stepped out onto the balcony. The ocean was still there, calm, patient, not judging. A breeze tugged at my sleeves. Somewhere down below, a shopkeeper rolled open a steel door and began a day that had nothing to do with SEC filings, investor panic, or ruined wedding toasts. Lisbon didn't care about Melanie. And finally, neither did I. She used to be the center of my world, the gravity that dictated every orbit. Now, she was just a voice on a call I didn't need to return. I took a sip, closed my eyes. The taste was bitter, rich, and perfect. The past was over. And I wasn't just free, I was unreachable.